Welcome to the Drift and Ramble podcast. I'm Steve Blizin. Each episode will explore true stories and American legends. From the pages of history and a few stories handed down over the years, we'll look at the people, places, and events that helped shape a nation. Stories of survival, notable frontier men and women, explorers who struck it rich, and the outlaws that stole it from them. There'll be studies of saloon girls, swindlers, banditry, and bad men, profiles of lawmen and American Indians, and the good and evil that existed between them. We'll amble through the past, we'll delve into the folklore of the times, and maybe even uncover a ghost story or two. So, saddle up, or settle in, for the Drift and Ramble podcast. This is episode 28. This episode is part 2 of a 2-part series. We strongly recommend you listen to both parts in sequence to get the full story. In our last episode, we learned about Black Bart, the poet, and flour sack bandit. Black Bart had just robbed the stage at Funk Hill. The very same spot where he started his criminal career would turn out to be the scene of his final robbery. For 8 long years, James Hume and his Wells Fargo detectives chased Black Bart. Sometimes they felt they had just missed the man, and other times they knew the trail had gone cold. In one instance, trackers trailed the elusive bandit over 60 miles before the trail just vanished. Black Bart was an accomplished woodsman and tracker himself. And what's more, he never rode a horse. This proved to be a great advantage in eluding the authorities, and Bart seemed to know exactly how to make his tracks disappear.
Mr. Morse, I understand your reputation as a private detective is exceptional. I'd like to hire you to track a stagecoach robber I've been after.
I assume you mean Black Bart.
Well, you should never assume... Hey, wait a minute, how did you know?
How did I presume the correct suspect? A reasonable deduction, Mr. Hume. You've been chasing that man in the press for going on 8 years now. Clearly the man has become a thorn in your side. Not only has he robbed your company of hundreds, perhaps thousands of dollars, he has caused a great deal of embarrassment to you in the good name of Wells Fargo. I'm not surprised by your quarry, Mr. Hume, only that you took so long to ask for my assistance.
I should think there's little time to waste then, Mr. Morse. You'll find the case files and evidence located here and my staff at your disposal. I expect you'll keep me posted on your progress.
Indeed, Mr. Hume, expediently.
When word of McConnell and Rolari's encounter with Black Bart reached the offices of Wells Fargo, Hume dispatched his assistant, John Thacker, to the scene. Thacker and Sheriff Ben Thorne arrived just before dusk. They scoured the area in search of clues.
Look here. A man's hat. Looks like a nice bowler. Some trampled leaves. See this? Looks like dried blood. You think those boys hit our man?
I bet he hid up by that boulder. I'll see if there's any evidence up there.
I'll head up there with you, Thacker. You never know what we could find.
Got some partial footprints over here, but they're trampled pretty good by traffic. Mr. Thacker, would you say this looks like a place where a man may have bedded down for a night or two? Probably 2 nights, and you can call me John.
Gentlemen, look what we have here. A case for field glasses, a bag of crackers, looks like the name printed on the bag, a bag of sugar, same name on the bag, 3 dirty shirt cuffs and a handkerchief. Seems to be a number 9 shot lead inside.
Mind if I look at that handkerchief? There could be a laundry mark. Here it is. FX07. Now we have something to work with, gentlemen.
Black Bart had managed to escape, but just barely. He lost his hat and a small portion of his scalp, and because he needed to leave in a hurry, he had to leave most of his bounty behind. The gold amalgam he stole, valued at over $4,000, was his highest-grossing robbery to date. Black Bart was clearly unaccustomed to being fired upon. Desperate to avoid capture, Bart stuffed the gold into a hollow log and filled the opened end with leaves. Morse, Thacker, and Thorne went on about their business. Morse returned to San Francisco and began contacting each of the nearly 100 laundry services operating in the city. After a week, the task was complete. Not only did Morse find the laundry using that very peculiar mark, he had even been given a suspect's name, a Mr. C.E. Bolton.
Are you the man who runs the laundry?
Why, yes, I'm Mr. Ware. I'm agent for Phineas Ferguson of Ferguson and Biggie. They operate the California laundry. Do you have laundry that needs tending?
I'd like a look at your register. I have a handkerchief that might belong to one of your clients.
Is that so? Well, here it is. Have a look.
Ah, here we are. FX07. Don't suppose you happen to know who this customer is?
I most certainly do. That's Mr. C.E. Bolton, a lovely man. He owns a mine and is an engineer. Very successful. Lives just down the road. It's a small hotel room at 37 2nd Street, room 40, I believe. Lovely man. About 50, I'd say. Wears a thick gray mustache and neatly groomed imperial. Friendly fellow, piercing blue eyes.
Let's step outside so we can talk privately, shall we?
Absolutely, of course. Right this way. As I was saying, Mr. Bolton is a lovely man. Just lovely. Why, here he comes now. I don't believe I got your name, sir.
Hamilton. My name is Hamilton.
Charlie! So good to see you, Charlie. This here is Mr. Hamilton. He wanted to have a word with you. Oh, forgive my manners. Mr. Bolton, Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton, Mr. Bolton. There. Now, you've both been properly introduced.
Mr. Bolton, you said?
Yes. How can I be of service?
I'm wondering if we might have a word with my assistant. Rumor is you're a successful mine owner, and I'd like to speak with you about opportunities.
Why, of course I would. I'm always eager to learn of opportunities.
The two men, now engaged in conversation, ambled off towards the detective's office. The conversation must have been intriguing because when Charlie Bowles, or Mr. C.E. Bolton, passed beneath the large Wells Fargo sign out front, neither man wavered. Bolton willingly stepped inside and was led to greet a third man who introduced himself to Mr. Bolton.
Hello, Mr. Bolton, did you say?
Yes, that's right. C.E. Bolton, engineer and mine owner.
Well, Mr. Bolton, where exactly is your mine?
Oh, it's on the California-Nevada line.
Yes, but where exactly?
Well, I don't see how that's any of your business. I mean, I don't know who you are or just what all these questions are about.
But Black Bart did know what these questions were about. He knew the name of James Hume as his primary pursuer, and when the man introduced himself, Bart had nowhere to run. Still, he continued to pretend he was Charles Bolton as beads of sweat formed on his forehead. As Hume and Morse patiently questioned him, Black Bart's resolve began to sway.
What is this game you two intend to play?
I assure you, Mr. Bolton, just answer a few more questions and we'll tell you why we want to know what we're asking you. By the way, how did you acquire that wound on your hand?
I injured it disembarking the train in Truckee while going to visit my mine.
Oh, yes, your mine. And where exactly is this mine again, Mr. Bolton? I don't believe you ever made that clear.
On and on the questions went.
Where were you born, Mr. Bolton?
When did you first arrive in California?
How old are you, Mr. Bolton?
Have you ever been to Angel's Camp?
What was the name of that mine you own again?
Is this your laundry mark on this handkerchief?
What of it? I'm not the only one whose things bear this mark. Others have their washing done at the same place.
Try on this hat. Let's see if it fits.
Oh, yes. Fits rather well. It's a very good hat indeed. Would you gentlemen consider sending it to me?
It's not for sale. So you say this handkerchief is not yours?
I could have lost it, I suppose. Perhaps someone else found it?
Why, this seems to be exactly what happened, Mr. Bolton. It was found by someone else, at exactly the spot where Sonora Stagecoach was robbed.
Enough! I will not answer any more questions.
Very well then, Mr. Bolton. Mr. Morse, see that Captain Stone from the city prison is on his way to come collect our good friend Mr. Bolton here. Perhaps a night at Webb House will restore his memory.
I've already taken the liberty, Mr. Hume. Mr. Bolton's carriage awaits. Right this way, Mr. Bolton.
What? You take me for a stage robber?
With that, Black Bart, a.k.a. Charles Bolton, a.k.a. Charlie Bowles, was taken to the city prison. When he arrived, the desk sergeant checked the prisoner in.
Name?
T.Z. Spaulding.
T.Z. Spaulding. Guards, take Mr. Spaulding here to his new home.
Detectives Hume and Morse returned to question their suspect the following day. For hours, they continued to question the man, methodically pacing out the questions, while Charlie Bowles, a.k.a. Bolton, a.k.a. Black Bart, a.k.a. T.Z. Spaulding, ranged through a number of postures and attitudes: cooperative, combative, angry, aloof, talkative, brooding, sullen, and finally, he broke.
Mind you, I do not admit that I committed this robbery. But what benefit would it be to the man who did acknowledge it?
Well, it would affect a mitigation of his sentence.
Supposing the man who did commit the robbery were to admit it, would it not be possible for him to get clear of this altogether?
No, but if such a man was to be found guilty of all these robberies, then he would be sentenced to life.
I want you to know that I will not go to San Quentin. I will die first.
By now, Charlie Bowles, Black Bart, T.Z. Spaulding, or whatever you want to call him, had been questioned for hours. The two expert crime fighters were patiently waiting, pacing themselves for a very, very long night. It was after midnight, and the man they had in custody was desperate. Already on the verge of a full confession, Black Bart thought that if he turned over the stolen gold, he might get a lighter sentence. He also knew by now that they had very little evidence against him in all the other robberies. Black Bart finally stood and said,
Well, let's go after it.
With that, Morse, John Thacker, and Captain Stone from the prison escorted Black Bart to the scene of the crime. Though late at night, the moon was bright, and the men rode on as Black Bart regaled them with his experiences in the Civil War. As Charles Bolton, or Charlie Bowles, the man was witty, chatty, and loved to joke around. Now, after having cleared his conscience, Black Bart was in a very talkative mood. In fact, the man could barely keep his mouth shut. As the men rode on, he described how he had learned of the gold shipment, camped by the crime scene, and at one point even tried to make a joke about seeing another robber at the scene of the crime just 3 days before his big heist.
Well, see, I was camped up by the spot, up on Funk Hill, and I watched the stage go by every day. I kept track of the time it went by and who was driving, and on the third day, a man steps out into the road in front of the stage with a handkerchief around his face. And I think to myself, well, here's a go. Here's opposition. This fellow's going to take the stage. Another agent in the business. I thought, why not let him rob the stage and I could just go rob him? Then, if he didn't get much money from the stage, I could just turn him in as Black Bart. No one knew what he looked like, so I could have that reward money too.
Though Charles Bolton may have thought the story funny, Morse and his men were not amused. They were strictly business, and they still had questions.
Well, just how did you come up with the name Black Bart?
There was this story in the newspaper called The Case of Summerfield. It was one of those pseudo-scientific affairs. The villain was named Bartholomew Graham, but was more commonly known as Black Bart. The name just came to me, popped into my head when I was ready to sign the first poem.
What about those poems? What was the meaning of that?
It was fun for me. Part of the mystery, I suppose. A clue that was impossible to unravel. I had a third one ready to leave, but when those men fired at me, well, I had not time to leave it. We're almost at the spot where I committed my very first robbery. Right here at Funk Hill. It's ironic, really. The very spot where I committed my last robbery.
Black Bart led the men to the spot where he claimed to have hidden the gold. $4,200 worth, in fact, the largest amount Black Bart would have stolen, if he had gotten away with it. Detective Morse had only been on the case for 10 days, and in that time, either Harry Morse had his luckiest streak, or Black Bart had his worst. Bart would later claim that Hume and Morse had made a deal with him for the return of that gold, offering Bart a lesser sentence in exchange for the return of the gold. Newspapers alluded to as much. Hume and Morse were outraged by the accusation and swore no such deal was made. But while Black Bart's reign of terror was over for Wells Fargo, his celebrity status barely reached its zenith. The trial proceedings of the poet were mostly uneventful. Mr. C.E. Bolton did make a rather long and rambling statement denying he was Black Bart, and this was his first robbery and probably his last. But the newspapers had already set up the poet for celebrity, and interest in the old coot never seemed to wane. One of the interesting things that came from all the attention were the comparisons of Black Bart to Detective James Hume. The two men bore an uncanny resemblance. Many thought the two could pass for brothers. Hume was taller and wore no imperial goatee, but aside from that, the two mustachioed bookends bore many similar features. The bank detective also held a piercing gaze. Black Bart was perhaps a more diminutive version of the Wells Fargo detective, but they both possessed a clever way of working out their quarries, and they both enjoyed a great deal of success, despite the 8-year span between those first and last recorded robberies. Black Bart was sentenced as Charles Bolton and placed in the care of Sheriff John Thorne, and there he remained until finally being shipped off to San Quentin. It wasn't long before Bart got busy writing again. His first letter was sent to Reason McConnell, the man who shot but missed the Flour Sack Bandit, and the driver of the last stage Black Bart was known to rob.
Mr. McConnell, dear sir, you will please pardon me for this long delay in acknowledging your kind compliments so hastily sent me on the 3rd of November last. But rest fully assured, my dear sir, that you are remembered, and with nothing but the most friendly feelings, as a man having done your duty to your employer, yourself, and to the community at large. I have often admired your fine qualities as a driver, and only regret that I am unable to compliment you on your marksmanship. I would like to hear from you, however, if consistent with your wishes, and, my dear sir, you have my best wishes for an unmolested, prosperous, and happy drive through life. Yours in haste, Black Bart. P.S. But not in quite so much of a hurry as on a former occasion.
Jimmy Rolari's sisters believed he also received a letter from Black Bart, but the letter has been lost to time. So have any replies Black Bart may have received from the two men responsible for his downfall. In the aftermath of the conviction of Black Bart, Wells Fargo rewarded their stagecoach driver with a $100 bonus.
Woo-hoo! Got me $100 for getting robbed by Black Bart. Hot damn! With $100, I can buy me a big old pillow to put under my behind and make that stagecoach drive be less of a pain in my posterior.
Wells Fargo rewarded Jimmy Rolleri, too. They presented him with a specially made rifle with intricate gold inlays and a special inscription thanking him for the events leading to the capture and conviction of Black Bart. Rolleri was an avid hunter, so naturally, he jumped at his first chance to shoot his brand-new rifle.
Oh, look! There's a nice-looking buck in the field over yonder. Let me just squint my eye like this and then pull the rifle back into my shoulder slowly. Squeeze the trigger nice and slow. What? Dang it! You'd think with all their money, them folks at Wells Fargo would give me a decent rifle instead of this here child's toy. Well, let me just gather up all these pieces and I'll send them back to them boys and see if they can fix this stupid thing.
John Thacker and Harry Morse both felt like they deserved the big reward that had been put out for the arrest and conviction. The two became bitter enemies over the reward monies.
If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have captured Black Bart. I tracked him down through his laundry mark. You just sat there like a lump. Lump? Why, I'll give you a lump. Ha! Good luck, you weasel-faced saddle tramp.
John Thacker continued to work for the Wells Fargo Company and eventually replaced Jim Hume as chief of detectives. Harry Morse continued with his successful private detective business and became a very wealthy man. Jim Hume was in his 50s when he finally wed the apple of his eye, a school teacher just 21 years old when they first met. Hume pursued her in much the same way he went after Black Bart, in a relentless chase that lasted 5 years. Bart, of course, eluded the chief detective for 8 years. The May-December romance spanned some 30 years between them. She gave birth to 2 boys, but only one survived, and he was named Samuel. Bart served 4 years and 2 months of his 6-year sentence. From all appearances, he was a model prisoner. He did make friends with at least one inmate, a murderer by the name of Dorsey. But as with all bad men and bloodlines, you're only as good as your last robbery, and life behind bars made the press soon forget about Black Bart and his escapades. Black Bart was released from San Quentin on January 21, 1888. Now, 54, Charlie Bowles wrote to his family about the horrors of prison, about how he felt demoralized and he wanted time alone. When the boat docked in San Francisco, a small crowd of reporters met the boat to greet the man.
Mr. Bowles! Mr. Bowles!
Mr. Bowles, do you think prison life has hurt you?
Not at all. You can see I'm feeling quite well. A little deaf maybe, but otherwise fit as a fiddle.
Tell us about your time in the Civil War, Mr. Bowles.
Mr. Bowles!
Mr. Bowles!
Do you think you'll ever rob a stagecoach again?
No, I will not rob another stage or steal again.
Mr. Bowles! Mr. Bowles! Mr. Bowles!
It is of no use asking me anything more. I will say nothing further.
Mr. Bowles, do you think you'll go back to writing more poetry?
Young man, did you not just hear me say, I will commit no more crimes?
It seems the witty poet could not resist a good setup. Though Black Bart wrote affectionate letters to his wife throughout his ordeal, it was clear that whatever Charlie Bowles was planning after prison, he wasn't planning to return to Hannibal, Missouri again. He always did seem to have that urge to wander. And though we've had a glimpse into the mysterious origin and life of Black Bart, one big mystery still remains. Whatever became of the poet? After he was released from prison, he just sort of disappeared. Only 2 days after Black Bart was released from San Quentin, a cryptic note appeared in the personals column of the San Francisco Examiner. It read, "Black Bart will hear something to his advantage by sending his address to MR, Box 29, this office. The notice appeared only once. Speculators assumed it was from his mistress, a lady friend said to have been close to Black Bart, but no such lady friend has ever come forward, and no other evidence proves one ever existed. Black Bart may have been gone, but he was not forgotten. Wells Fargo continued to suffer stagecoach robberies, and a few bore all the signs of the gentleman bandit's trademarks. Detective Hume was certain that Black Bart had returned to his life of crime. But within just weeks of Black Bart's release, the man himself gave the bank boys the slip. He booked a hotel room in Visalia under the name of Mr. M. Moore and gave the hotel owner explicit instructions to ship the contents of his room to one Detective Hume. When Hume received the package, he found 2 pairs of cuffs bearing the laundry mark FX07, a valise, a jar of pickles, some crackers, sugar, and other provisions, along with a jar of currant jelly. Black Bart had tauntingly said his final farewell.
Blast that Black Bart! He's at it again.
And perhaps he was. After several stagecoach robberies that bore a strong resemblance to Black Bart's M.O., Hume was so convinced the man was on the road again, he had some circulars printed up to describe Black Bart and all known names and aliases. But others speculate that Wells Fargo paid the man a pension to keep him from robbing them again. Clearly, Hume would not have wasted resources just to make appearances. When imitators claimed to be Black Bart, they were quickly investigated and found to be fakes. And Hume's assistant, John Thacker, claims he was in charge of tracking the man after his release. Thacker claimed that Bart had left the country, for Japan of all places. As someone tasked with tracking a known outlaw, Thacker's story may have some credibility. But again, there simply is no evidence. In 1892, Mary Bowles appears in the Hannibal, Missouri city listing as the widow of Charlie Bowles. Did she somehow know that Charlie was dead? She had presumed it once before and made no claim about it then. Now, if he was indeed dead, how did they identify the body? According to reports, he continued to show up around the country for many years. Alaska, Los Angeles, sightings came from witnesses everywhere throughout the U.S. And finally, a New York newspaper said he died as Charles E. Bowles in 1917. He would have been 87. In the early 1970s, Black Bart surfaced one more time, this time as the suggested title of a movie and a TV series. And just like the story of the Flour Sack Bandit, the story behind the movie is just as bizarre as Black Bart's legacy. The movie was first titled Texas X, which was rejected by Warner Brothers Studios. It was then titled Black Bart, which the studio also rejected. The writer-director of the film said inspiration for the final title came to him when he was taking a shower, and the film was titled Blazing Saddles. And it was supposed to star comedian and contributing writer Richard Pryor. But once again, the studio stepped in and said they would not allow Pryor, with his recent arrest and drug problems, to be in the starring role. So Cleavon Little was cast to play the role of Sheriff Bart. Though highly controversial at the time of its release, Blazing Saddles went on to become a comedy classic and one of the highest-grossing movies of its time. A TV series was produced as part of the studio's legal obligation to retain control of the film's rights to produce a sequel. And though Black Bart, the TV series, starring Louis Gossett Jr., was never actually broadcast, it went through 3 seasons of production before finally being canceled. But if Black Bart, the TV series, remained a mystery, so did the man himself. Disappearing from the public eye shortly after his prison release,
Black Bart was never heard from again. But that is not to say he was forgotten. As recently as June of 2017, Black Bart's descendants are keeping his memory and mystery alive. Black Bart's great-great-grandson, David Bowles, claims that Charles was actually named Alvy Bowles, not Charlie. The man of many monikers seems to keep adding to his list. Perhaps we'll never know the truth about Black Bart's story, because men like Black Bart never die. They become legends. Many resources were utilized in researching this episode. Although every effort has been made to provide fact, some discrepancies may arise. I'd like to acknowledge the following resources. BlackBart.com, Bad Company by Joseph Henry Jackson, Manhunters of the Old West by Robert K. DeArmond, Kathy Weiser Alexander and legendsofamerica.com, Black Bart, Boulevardier Bandit by George Hoper, Lawman, The Life and Times of Harry Morse, 1835 to 1912 by John Bosendecker, Wikipedia.org, Great Stagecoach Robberies of the Old West by Michael Wilson. Recently, I learned about the sudden passing of our friend and Western historian, Glenn Davis. Glenn wrote several books that have been mentioned here, including Love and Danger in the Old West, Keeping the Peace, Tales from the Old West, and his most recent book, Old West Chronicles. I never had a chance to meet the man in person, but I imagine if we had met, we would have had a lot to talk about. So this episode is dedicated to the memory of Glenn Davis, author, Western historian, U.S. Navy Chief, retired, Vietnam veteran. Thanks for listening to the Drift and Ramble podcast. We really appreciate having you along for the ride. I also want to say thanks to a lot of folks who helped out with today's show. You can see a full cast list and show notes on our Patreon page at patreon.com/driftandrambble. That's patreon.com/driftandrambble. Black Bart was played by Lewis Jackson. James Hume was played by Greg McAfee. Miss Campbell's daddy, claim buyer number 2, Dr. Drake, the desk sergeant, and reporters were played by Pete Lutz. Miss Campbell was played by M.J. Cogburn. John Shine, Harry Morse, claim buyer number 1, John Thacker, reporters, and Reason McConnell were played by Austin Beach. Townsfolk, Wells Fargo detective, the lawman, and reporters were played by Scott Phillips. Henry Roberts, Jimmy Rillari, Sheriff Thorne, and Wells Fargo Detective Number 2 were played by Drew Prophet. The female deputy was played by Cheryl Blizzin. Don McLean, John Oliver, and Mr. Ware were all played by me.
That's you texting me, Steve.
Folks, this is the part of the program where I usually do my level best to tell you about Fate Crafters Network and why you should check out all the amazing shows that are part of this premier network of independent podcast producers. But this time, I'm going to let one of our more recent members and our first international member from Brazil, Danilo Battistini, tell you about his latest project.
Hello everyone, my name is Danilo Battistini. I'm the producer for the Brazilian audio drama podcast called Contador de Histórias. In English it means storyteller. And I'm part of Fate Crafters Network, so what you're about to hear is a compilation of my audio drama cyberpunk show called Dias Digitais, Caça aos Hackers. In English, Digital Days, Hackers Hunting. You are more than invited to know more about it on Contador de Histórias. Hope you like it, and see ya!
O ano é 2622 e o mundo vive sob o governo da nova ordem mundial.
Espero que todos tenham compreendido.
Em uma semana, centenas de hackers desaparecerão.
Não é o governo? Então quem é o responsável?
Você sabe quem tá por trás?
Qual a resposta do governo para o que está acontecendo?
Falando em nome do governo, eu posso garantir que não somos nós.
Meu Deus, Eco, parece que eles estão...
Alguns se calaram.
Suas últimas palavras.
Foi um prazer trabalhar com você, Eco.
Mas ainda existem pessoas em busca da verdade.
Me prometeram umas respostas com esse trabalho. As coisas vão mudar, Torre.
Era um IP fantasma.
Mas que merda!
Invasão de sistema detectada. Iniciando protocolos de segurança.
Peguem ela!
Ninguém vai pegar ninguém, não.
Não tem mais pra onde ir, hacker!
Morte confirmada.
Eco, sai daí!
Desgraçado!
O Projeto Alma.
Mas que lugar é esse?
E o jogo começa.
Dias Digitais. Caça aos Hackers. Uma série original de audiodrama do podcast Contador de Histórias.
These shows are created with impeccable sound quality, storytelling, and production. And if you speak Portuguese, then you're really going to enjoy them. Check out all the Fatecrafters shows at fatecrafters.net. Coming up on the next edition of the Drift and Ramble podcast, it's the story of one of the most accurate sharpshooters to ever hold a rifle. A person with such deadly aim, they purposely had to miss shots just so they wouldn't be thought of as perfect. A Western legend who, oddly, never lived any further west than Ohio. And at just 5 feet tall, became one of the biggest celebrities of the times. I'm talking, of course, about Miss Phoebe Ann Mosey. Well, you might know her better as Annie Oakley. It's all about Little Sure Shot, Annie Oakley, on the next Drift and Ramble podcast. And folks, we're honored to have Rhiannon and Greg McAfee from the amazing Rex Riveter Private Eye join us for this very special episode. Until we meet again, I'm Steve Blizzin.
And I'm Cheryl Blizzin.
See you on the next Drift and Ramble podcast.
The Drift and Ramble podcast is a Clear Voice Media production, hosted and produced by Steve Blizzin, with segment research and voice acting by Cheryl Blizzin. Additional contributions and content have been made possible by support from individuals dedicated to the art and science of storytelling and exploring the still fertile promise of the American West.